Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today, one of the enormous backlog of tags that I want to do on this channel, the stuff that I've noticed on BookTube, stuff that I've been tagged in, even a few original tags that I want to do. And I'm mixing them all up. So there are some that I have been working on or thinking about or noticed a long time ago that I'm not doing right now. I'm not doing that today. Instead, I'm doing one that I was just tagged in. This is the We Ain't Getting Younger book tag, which was created by the guys at CodeX Cantina, a BookTube channel that I have heard all about from a whole bunch of different channels that I watch, but it never actually dawned on me to go and subscribe to their channel and then watch them, watch all their back videos, watch their current videos, and then look forward to their videos. And they didn't tag me on the We Ain't Getting Younger book tag, probably because they hate me, probably because I smell. But Shawn the Book Maniac did this tag, and he did tag me because not only is he acclimated to my smell, but I guess he knows that I'll put up a kind of prima donna foot stamping hissy fit if I don't get tagged. And maybe the guys at Codex Cantina have not learned that yet. But they are Una and Crypto, are the two guys at Codex Cantina. And this tag was created in honor of Crypto's 40th birthday. And as pen names go, naturally, Crypto has Steve's full approval. And as speaking as someone who made the old plastic Crypto model that you could get, you could send away for a model and get a model of Crypto and Superboy. It took me a long time to do. You had to use your own glue. You had to be very careful with all the pieces went. And I made that statue. You could probably find a picture of what that thing must have looked like back when it was made. You could probably find a picture on Google. And I was so happy with the result. I was so proud of, I got the tree right, and I got Crypto right, and his cape right, and Superboy right. I got it all right. I did it all right. I was not so inclined all that back a million years ago when that I wouldn't be any more inclined today to assemble a model. I'm just not good at that sort of thing. I don't have any sense of touch. And my pride did not last long. My pride went before the fall because my dogs, my beagles, just destroyed it. They just destroyed that statue completely. Otherwise, I would have it. I guarantee you Crypto would be visible in this room. I would love that. To have a statue of Crypto the Superdog, I would love it. No offense to Crypto on Codex Cantina. If I had to choose between having a statue of you and having a statue of Crypto the Superdog, I would pick Crypto the Superdog. But anyway, it's this tag was done in honor of his 40th birthday. There was quite a bit of good-natured joking all through the tag, and you'll see in the questions are all patterned on, grandpa humor in Hallmark cards about birthdays of people who are getting older. Naturally, it made me smile a little wryly since 40 was a long time ago for me. So it's not the end of the world to turn 40, but I thought we'd just go through the questions and see what kind of trouble we can get into. So question number one, while it's proven too many birthdays can kill you, the amount of cake we can eat is still under debate. Name the most recent book that gave you a sugar/book high. And the most recent one, a small variation of that, would be The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I've read an enormous amount of new books in 2020. But when we're talking about a sugar high, a book high, I myself am picturing the very spike of the Richter scale. When the needle goes all the way to the top, that kind of thing where your hair is standing on end. And reading experiences like that don't happen very often to me. In the course of one normal year of reading new releases, I can expect maybe 10, that will happen maybe 10 times. There'll be backlist stuff as well, new discoveries from backlist, all that sort of thing. But in terms of new releases, which is the bulk of what I read, it won't happen that often. And so I'm happy that it's happened as many times as it has this year. The Mirror and the Light would definitely be the most recent one. That was one where I was breathless. I was thrilled right down to my DNA. It was just incredible. But also in 2020, The American People Volume 2, The Brutality of Fact by Larry Kramer. was every bit as brilliant, every bit as thrilling on a line-by-line, paragraph-by-paragraph, chapter-by-chapter basis, although it's far less recommendable. In fact, neither one is all that recommendable, because the Mirror and the Light is very much a continuation of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Body. So if you haven't read those books, if you're going into The Mirror and the Light cold, as a historical novel about Cromwell and Henry VIII, I don't know what you'd make out of it. I think a lot of its beauty, a lot of its resonances would go right past you. I might be wrong about that, but I'll never know. And the same thing is true with The Brutality of Fact. How on earth can I recommend it? I do recommend it. It is a brilliant, brilliant book. But it's bitter and angry, and it's about a tragedy. It's about the AIDS epidemic. I don't, and it's long, and it's daunting. I don't know who I could recommend it to. I've hardly found anybody so far. It's now, April? It feels like December, but it's April of 2020. I've found virtually nobody that I can recommend it to, except, quixotically, other book reviewers, most of whom didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it was so long and so involved. Wimps, I tell you. But another book, not quite the same height of The Needle, but still a really good book from 2020, is Why We're So Polarized by Ezra Klein. A political commentary, a piece of contemporary political commentary. So you wouldn't think that it would get this kind of designation from me, because that sort of stuff stales like yesterday's news. It is yesterday's news. But even so, I've been waiting for a book from this guy for a while, and this one did not disappoint. I thought it was gamely intelligent. So it's not quite the two peaks so far, at least for fiction. For scholarship, it would be that Essential Works of Thomas More. That was just amazing. I'm still not done with it. That was just amazing. But for fiction, the guys at Codex Cantina, very, very much along the fiction wavelength. Very much along a certain kind of fiction wavelength. So for fiction, I would use those too. Although, again, I'm not sure that what I'm doing is recommending them, which is very frustrating for me, since I am a book critic. I'm a book assessor, and I am the junkyard watchdog. I am not up on the hills of Parnassus. I'm not in an ivory tower. When I'm talking about books, I'm talking about whether or not they're worth your money and your time to buy and read, not whether or not critics yet unborn and accents yet unheard are going to love it in 200 years. That's not my beat. I won't be caring. And so it's rough to sing the praises of two books that I can't exactly recommend. There'll be other books. There'll be books in 2020 that will be where the Richter scale needle will go just as high. That will be things that I can recommend just easily, just hand to people. I'm sure there will be. Then question number 2, sometimes we get older and wider instead of older and wiser. Name the longest book you've ever read. And a few candidates came to mind here. One of the candidates is something that I've mentioned many times on this channel, and that is Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi, which is 1,500 pages long. Another one that came to mind is Hermann Abert's. Hermann Abert did an enormous biography of Mozart that I was asleep at the wheel. I wasn't reviewing books at the time, I don't think. And I only learned about it when it was translated into English and was reviewed in the New York Review of Books. How's that for the very end of the tale of the game of telephone? I didn't learn about it until then, and then I hunted it down, and then I hunted it down again and read it, and it is also 1,500 pages long. So those would both be contenders. And then another book that came to mind that's easily longer than either one of them is Paul and the Faithfulness of God by Tom Wright. A gigantic work. It is typically broken up into parts, but it was written as one book, and it is a cinder block of a thing about St. Paul and about early Christianity and about a kind of exultant reading of the epistles and the New Testament. I love this author's writing. I didn't always love it. I've come to love it. I've come to love his register, and I got a copy of Paul and the Faithfulness of God and read it over the course of an entire week and was just delighted with it. Just absolutely delighted with it. I really, really can recommend it to those of you who are theologically inclined. But it's the work of a lifetime for most people. It's like 2,220 pages long, something like that. And so I would, in the context of this question, I would say that is the longest book, but I don't know. I might have to give the palm back to Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Helter Skelter, a famous trial lawyer, wrote an enormous 1,500-page book on the Kennedy assassination. Not just recounting exactly what happened to the best of our ability to reconstruct it historically, minute by minute, during that day. Although that part is bravura, so good it's actually been detached and made into a book of its own. But then analyzing the Warren Report and every conspiracy theory that has sprung up in the wake of the Warren Report, knocking each of those conspiracy theories down, picking out holes in them. And that is the book. But the book comes with a disc of notes, of endnotes. And ordinarily I wouldn't include that. I wouldn't say that lengthened the length of the book, but the endnotes are discussions, lots of them. And probably 60-70% of them are discussions, sometimes at enormous length. They are very integral parts of the narrative of the book. In a perfect world, or in an exclusively electronic world, I believe that those notes would be on the bottom of every page, and that would mean that Reclaiming History would be easily 4,000 pages long, 3,000 pages long, and it would then retake the palm as being the longest book I've ever read. So it might be that, because I read Reclaiming History twice, and I read the notes twice. I'm probably, aside from Vincent Bugliosi, the only person in the world who's ever done that. I consider it a major, major work, and that's what gave me my familiarity with those endnotes. They are not just opsit, they're not just see above, they're discussions in their own right. So that might be the longest book I've ever read. Might also be the longest book ever written. But anyway, let's move on here. Question number 3 is the best part about pictures is that they're always a younger version of you. Oddly enough, not true with me. I have made a number of calculation errors over time, and so if you look back at earlier pictures of me, I will be 28 in those pictures exactly as I am today before you, 28. But in most people's case, yes, it would be true that it's a younger version of you. Name a book that you enjoyed more the first time you read it than the second. This happens quite often to me, and because I tend to read everything, all the new releases that I get, I tend to read more than once. I read them first for impressions, for readability, for the sense of forward momentum, that sort of thing, and then I read them critically, especially if I'm going to review them, and that's a different thing. That is slower and more meticulous and more evaluative, often correcting enthusiastic reactions from the first read through. But the one that I have in mind, I don't want to come off as bashing it. I'm not bashing it. It is actually a very good book. But I disliked it. I liked it less the second time than I did the first time. It's Exit Right by Daniel Oppenheimer. And it's a relatively recent book. I think it was a couple of years ago. I might have written about it. Again, if I wrote about any of these things, I will try to remember to leave links in the show notes. It's a study of people who were on the left, political left spectrum, who moved right. So you've got Norman Podhoretz, you've got famously Christopher Hitchens, you've got Ronald Reagan, a few other characters in there. It's just a handful of people. And when I first read it, I was struck by the same thing that so many critics and readers were struck by when they read this book, which is how good these profiles are. That Oppenheimer is so good at writing these profiles. It made me hope, while I was a predictable hope on my part, because it's my favorite kind of writing, but it made me hope while I was reading the book that sooner or later we would see a full-length biography by him of somebody. Fine by me if it's one of these people. What I wouldn't give for a 600-page biography of Christopher Hitchens by Daniel Oppenheimer. What I wouldn't give for that. But I would take Podhoretz as well, a biography, or any of these people. But in the book, he analyzes 6 people, half a dozen people, who originally espoused leftist political views or normal, middle of the spectrum, in Ronald Reagan's case, political views, and who migrated over time to the right end of the spectrum, to the conservative end of the spectrum. And the first time I read it, I was blown away by how well done it is, how readable it is. The second time I read it, I kept noticing a note being struck. Very subtly, so subtly that the author might not even have been aware of it himself. I'm not willing to lay this all at his doorstep, and again, that's why I'm not bashing the book. But the second time around, I got the note was struck over and over and over again that what he was describing was a disease pathology. that he wasn't just describing case after case of someone migrating from the left end of the political spectrum to the right end of the political spectrum, but case after case of someone migrating from the right end of the political spectrum to the wrong end of the political spectrum. That he was describing something bad that happened to each of his characters. Now, if I remember correctly, he doesn't explicitly come out and ever say anything like that. In fact, I think he does probably a very heroic job of trying to stick to a neutral tone, but it was the distinct impression that I got the second time that I read the book, and I don't agree with that at all. Of course, I don't agree with that at all. That if that is something that is oozing out of your prose, even if you're not putting it in there, then you needed to do a better job at policing your prose, because that's not warranted. But nevertheless, as you can tell from this description, I probably need to read that book again. I automatically just assume that I'm going to get a paperback of these things from the publisher, and maybe Exit Right hasn't had one. But I shouldn't automatically assume that anymore, because even if Exit Right hasn't had a paperback and gets one this summer, I don't know that I'll get it. I don't know that I'll get books in the mail again. So I should pay attention to these things, definitely. More attention than I do. Then let's see here. Question number 4. As you get older, you must learn to never skip a bathroom break before jumping in a car ride. Name a book you read in very few sittings. Have you ever walked to the bathroom holding the book and then blindly fumbled for the door handle? I have never done the second part, walked to the bathroom holding a book and fumbled with the door handle, because I keep books in the bathroom. I keep a stack of ongoing books on the seat of ease, so that I don't ever have to worry about grabbing something before I go into the bathroom. There are books waiting for me there they're rotated through. They don't just sit there gathering dust, and they are what answers the need when that need arises. And since I am a ripe old 28, that need arises very, very often. But as far as the first part of the question, name a book you read in very few sittings. This is one of those kinds of BookTube tag questions that don't really work. For me, they just sort of shed off an oily skin for me, because I read virtually everything in one sitting. I don't. The picture that I get when I watch all of you on your BookTube channels, where you're working on a book, when in the first week of March you've started it and you're really liking it, you've got first impressions, and then the next week in March you check in, you have another video, and you're still working on that book, and the third week in March you're still working on that book, and the fourth week in March you're still working on that is, I love watching those videos, but that is a totally alien world to me. Totally alien. I read very fast, and I do nothing else but read. So I can't, a book that I read in more than one sitting, it would have to be enormously long. And then maybe, but it wouldn't be, because most I'm going to have to skip the question, is what I'm saying, because most books I read in one sitting. Most books are 250, 260 pages. For me, that's an hour and a half, thereabouts, roughly an hour and a half of reading. I can do multiple single sittings in one day of books like that, and that is what most books are like. So I'm gonna punt on this question, just move on to the next one. Question number 5 is, don't let old age get you down, because it's harder to get back up these days. Some of these really have been reading these lame Hallmark card things. Name a book you had to put down, and why. And I saw, who was it? Deanie? Somebody, no, it was somebody else. Somebody talked about the other meaning of put down. Not only put back on your nightstand, but execute, euthanize, like we use the term for put down a dog. And this is true in both of those cases. Both of those meanings are true for me. The David Foster Wallace Reader, an absolutely beautiful volume that came out a few years ago, big brick of a thing, that gave considerable selection of shorter works by David Foster Wallace, a considerable selection of excerpts from longer works, in a beautifully designed package. And I had to put it down while I was reading it a number of times, because it was so maddening. I mean, the passages are mostly bad, that I think, except in Dude Bro circles, so I should probably specify for CodeX Cantina. That does go without saying. This was not a particularly good author. But the thing that maddened me was not that. It was how badly this author was let down by his editors. by editors who had been in the business for a long time, in a couple of cases longer than he had been alive, who allowed him to just bully them, just steamroll them when they knew better. And as a result, what might have been a literary body of work that we could talk about and that might be worth recommending or studying is instead your crazy uncle's attic that has every issue of National Geographic that's ever been made, but not in any useful way. So the first 50 years of those National Geographics are molding or covered in mouse crap or have melded into each other, and he just hasn't noticed. So it's not an interesting, complete backlog of National Geographic. Instead, it's a useless one. And useless because the caretaker of that archive did not do his job. So I had to put the David Foster Wallace book Reader down a few times. I did pick it back up every time, and I did finish it, and I ended up with, largely with the same second meaning interpretation of put down, which is that I wanted this. This can only do harm. Out there in the world, it can only do harm. It can only further deepen the dude bro spell that this author casts on young male readers. It can only deepen that spell, and that spell does not need deepening. That spell needs eradicating completely. So it counts in both senses of the word. And if I remember, I wrote a review that was rancorously received in certain aspects of the dude bro readership community, especially the dude bro readers who went on to become dude bro critics. Fortunately, the king of all dude bro book reviewers, John Leonard, was dead before the book came out, and so before my review came out, or it would have been a 10-round argument that I would have been winning in every round, but it wouldn't have mattered to him. But the king of dude bro book reviewers was gone by the time this thing came out, so instead I had his heirs to deal with. Anyway. Question number 6 is, age isn't how long you've been alive, it's how many lives you've lived. What book genres have you been wanting to try outside your comfort zone? I couldn't help but smile that the guys at Codex Cantina mentioned poetry as something outside their own comfort zone that they might be willing to try a little more extensively. And I wanted to say to them, and in addition to happy birthday and congratulations on your channel, I love the channel, I love the community that's built up around it. All of BookTube channels, most of which I did not know about. I knew about Pints and Paperbacks, but most of the others I've subscribed to as well. I want to be part of this community. It's so active, so enthusiastic and involved. Just lovely, just wonderful. So you can count, first of all, the guys at Codex Cantina can count on me showing up more often in their comments and begging and pleading for their attention. but in addition, so can all of the people that they link to. But when they made that offhand comment about poetry, I wanted to say, well, okay, you've made extensive videos about Stephen King and William Faulkner and a bunch of other dude bro writers. So when it comes time for you to go outside your comfort zone and read poetry, I want to say in all kindness, it doesn't count if when you do that, it's the poetry of Charles effing Bukowski. Okay? It doesn't count if it's his poetry. What you want to do is go outside not only of the genres, but also of the mind frame of dude bro lit just in general. You want to read, I don't know, maybe poetry by a woman. Wild idea, I know. Or maybe by a male poet who is not dude bro. So no Charles Bukowski, okay? No Robert Lowell. You want to go, when it comes time for you to go outside your comfort zone, why not in for a penny, in for a pound, and go outside of the whole of your comfort zone? Just an idea, that's all. But for me, there is a type of reading that it's not outside my comfort zone, because all books are my home. But it is outside my preference zone, absolutely, which is kind of what I was talking about with the dude bro Imperium. There's a type of reading, a type of book where I've never read an example, or virtually never read an example of it that I liked. And that is what I consider to be unwarranted memoirs, where typically a very young writer will write a memoir, even though they have done nothing, been nowhere, thought nothing original, experienced nothing except maybe occasional hard times. You had a stomach illness. You had a bout of cancer. Okay, great. Your father died, as did his father. It's heartless for me to say, but that is not grounds for a memoir unless you have superb writing ability. And oh my God, the people who write unwarranted memoirs never have superb writing ability. I'm kind of looking in your direction, Mary Carr. But that always bothers me. You know, I'm okay with Kenneth Branagh writing a memoir when he's 25 if he's already directed Henry V. But I'm not okay with you writing a memoir because you spent your college years unhappy and you want to tell me about them, okay? I'm not interested. It's not grounds for memoir that you took all sorts of medication in order to bring you back to a state of happiness that you never, in fact, experienced. So the hallmarks of this sub genre, Prozac Nation, it's a perfect example. That kind of writing, I know it has vociferous fans. That kind of unwarranted memoir where I have been alive for 24 years, so I think it's about time I wrote a book about it, don't you? I know that kind of genre has vociferous fans, so I'm thinking maybe there's something to it that I'm just not seeing. So that'd be outside my comfort zone, is certainly in terms of past experience, and I will in 2020 make sure to give it. I try to keep giving these things swings at bat. We'll see. The next one that I get, maybe I won't completely dismiss it now that I have crypto to guide the way. Then let's see here. Question number 7. Life gets worse the older you get. No, it doesn't. Luckily, you don't have much left. Name a book that slowly turned sour for you, but you finished anyway. Were you glad you stuck it out? I would finish anyway, no matter what. And it's the example that came to mind. There is a book, but it's really a body of work. It's really an author, and it's David Irving, the famous and now notorious, forever name-blackened British historian David Irving. The first book that came to mind when I read this prompt was Hitler's War by David Irving, but the later editions of it, not the first edition that he got past his publisher, but the later editions where he made substantial changes to the vocabulary, especially about the Holocaust and about Hitler's direct participation, Hitler's direct culpability in the final solution. But it doesn't have to be Hitler's War. It can be anything. It can be any of his. I've read everything that David Irving has written because I think he is an unbelievably interesting subject in his own right. A rare example of a historian being more interesting than anything that he's writing about. Because you can see the process. You can see this person who was probably personally odious, but who was under the same constraints that all the rest of us are to try and control and hide that, and then was gradually emboldened not only by his right-wing supporters in the here and now, but also by Hitler, who is very much capable of affecting people's minds, even though he's long dead. That's the thing with dangerous demagogues. They can do that. They can have a remote effect. Watching that change in Irving was fascinating, watching it in interviews and whatnot, but watching it especially in his prose is, for me, even more interesting. He has come out with a couple of very big biographies in the last 20 years, and I read them, and I stuck with them, even though I knew that by the end I was going to feel like I needed a long, hot shower. Because he's never as overt as he could be. There are plenty of right-wing Nazi historians out there alive today who are completely overt in saying that nobody died in what Irving says. Irving says that the people who... that more people... What was his famous line? More people died in the backseat of Ted Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick than were murdered in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. Stuff like that, designed to get attention and get his name in the papers, which he absolutely loved it as much as Hitler did. But to watch his later books, to watch this weird alternate history version of the Third Reich take place, just grow bit by bit, all from original sources. This guy is a fantastic archive researcher, lost to his discipline. If his mind hadn't been turned, what things we might have got from him, I have no idea. But all built on original sources, carefully massaged, carefully edited, carefully shaped to create an alternate version of the Third Reich in which they're ultranationalistic, sure, but they're not killers, they're not murderers, they're not petty or squalid. the picture of Hitler that emerges is this harried, just trying to succeed against all odds, bureaucratic underdogs who's telling his henchmen, just keep the Gauleiters off my back. Just stop these provincial squabbling long enough for me to get things done. This image of the Third Reich comes out in Irving's books, and I often want to say, in fact, I have said out loud, what are those things? You should be paying attention. You might be right about that characterization, but what are the things that he wants to get done without interruption? Those things are unmitigatedly horrible, and you're defending them. If you're not condemning them, you're defending them. How can this have happened? It's especially telling to me as an example, because he's virtually the same person as Christopher Hitchens. They have the exact same personal history, the exact same family history, the exact same educational history, the exact same unbelievably great prose style, the exact same pugnacious ability to think on their feet in a debate or in the question and answer period of a lecture. And they just, what Irving must have been to Hitchens, there but for the grace of God. No wonder Hitchens occasionally defended him. He must have seen a mirror image of himself in Irving. And I want to say to him, well, anyway, that's the answer to my question, is that the collected works of David Irving, I don't think we'll see another book from him, but I will read it if it comes out, and I've read all the others. And they always have that impression. They always have that impression on me. I want to stop, but I keep going. And it's a sour feeling. It's a very sour feeling by the time you're done. I don't recommend it at all. Not only because you're reading falsified history. I mean, Irving went famously to court over the question of whether or not he was consciously falsifying history. But he is. He's leaving out the worst things. He's not making one-to-one connections. Some of his original questions that he asked 40 years ago are incredibly vital, and historians should not have hated him for asking those questions. He asked, for instance, famously, 40, 50 years ago, he said, show me an original document that shows Hitler's direct knowledge of what was happening at any of the death camps in Germany or Poland. Show me a historical document that proves that. Otherwise, admit you are inferring it. Because that's what as Irving said back when he was a young man, wavy black hair, he said, that's what we're all about. Historians should be about that. You shouldn't be inferring anything. If you're building a case that this guy was the personally involved mastermind of the extermination of an entire race, you should be able to prove it with documents. Show me a document. Instead of showing me documents by underlings and saying he must have known about it. Well, you can say that, but that's not how we're supposed to operate. Historians should have been happy with that kind of challenge, and quite a few of them were, back before they knew that Irving was also losing his mind, that he was also going over to Mordor. But anyway, let's just move on. I could do a whole video about David Irving. When he dies, maybe I will. Unless he's dead already and I don't know about it. Oh, that's always awkward. Anyway, this has gone on long anyway, so I'm gonna continue. Question number 8 is peer pressure seems to decrease as you get older. My peers aren't human, so I've never experienced what you would call peer pressure. Where did all your friends go? I have a feeling that Crypto and Una are asking this question sarcastically. I would be willing to bet that neither one of them has lost someone they couldn't live without. Certainly, I doubt it's happened many times. Friends, acquaintances, yes, but there's a category of people in your life where you look at them in your mind and you think, I can't live without you. And then you do. And then you lose them. But it's not only that. If you're doing the job right, you also gain friends. But anyway, that's something I've definitely noticed. Maybe not in anybody as young as 40, but I've noticed that the older people get, the fewer friends they make. And that is deadly. Absolutely deadly. If you are over 50 and you're listening to this video and you haven't made a new friend, especially a new young friend, in years, you need to correct that. You really do. You're doing it wrong, to use the old euphemism. Anyway, name a book that you checked out because of peer pressure. Were you happy to have tried it? Now, the closest I can come here is the peer pressure of my actual colleagues, my actual peers in the book reviewing world. And occasionally that does perk my interest. Although every time it fails, it works less the next time. And there was a time, 10 years ago, where 10 or whatever years ago, where I was starting to hear people that, like me, had access to advanced copies of books were starting to mention the same thing over and over again and say how incredible, how terrific it was. And that was Karl Ove Knausgaard. his endless chronicle of his journals, his writing up of his journals that he called fiction. My Struggle is what he called it. I started hearing from other critics that I knew that, boy, oh boy, when you get this, you got to try it because it's amazing. And I got the first volume and I read it and realized right away the con game this guy was playing. And he has continued. He is now a towering figure in the literary landscape because he successfully grifted a bunch of bored reviewers. And I believe that's the reason for what caused that. Most of my reviewing colleagues are not Old Bailey hacks. Most of them have a particular patch of ground that they review, and they don't do anything else. I know an old friend who reviews only books on the American Revolution for the New York Review of Books. I know someone who reviews only books on religion. I know plenty of people who only review contemporary fiction. That's all they do. And because they have lives and children and wives and families and whatnot, other obligations, jobs, speaking engagements, that sort of thing, they get to a point where the only books they can read are the ones they're being paid to review. So all the plenitude goes out of their reading, and suddenly that's all they're reading. And I believe that a charlatan like Karl Ove Knausgaard can get over the fence and convince a lot of these people to jump on a bandwagon, not because of the literary merit of what he's producing, because it doesn't have any, but because of boredom. Because these critics have only read one thing. And I want to say to them, well, okay, don't lie about a book then. Change your reading habits. If that's the case, broaden your reading habits. Make a little more time. Make it, I guarantee you, no matter how busy you are, I can find an extra hour in your day. Why don't you devote that hour to reading history or natural history or science? So that when a charlatan comes along, you won't, out of boredom, say he's the greatest thing in the world. Anyway, I perhaps did say that in a few wine-soaked evenings. But anyway, that is it. That is the we ain't getting younger tag except to tag people. Because it says friends don't let friends get older alone. So tag people. And I have been a little reluctant to tag people lately, but then I realized I can tag people by name, and they can ignore me if they want. Plenty of people ignore me. People ignore me all the time. So I'm going to tag people. I'm going to tag Mark at Riches and Reads, of course, who was also, like me, felt the touch of the Grim Reaper. I'm going to tag Olive at A Book Olive if you want to do this. Juan at Just Juan Reader if you want to do this. It's terrific. These prompts are great. I want to tag Shawn D. Standfast, who, like Mark and myself, let's just say breakfast is no longer being served at this establishment. Let's just put it that way. Sarah at Steeped in Books. Rachel Morrow, absolutely. The Rambling Raconteur, I tagged you once before. I love the result. Lukash at Totally Pretentious, who's very, very young. I don't want to hear anything about to the contrary. David Murphy, of course, who's still comparatively young. not his lungs. His lungs aren't young, but the rest of them, yes. Also, James Holder, I love it when you do tags like this. And also, I found a channel, The Wandering Bibliophile, Caitlin at The Wandering Bibliophile, who had a BookTube channel way back when, 5 years ago, and now has resumed booktubing. A new vibe, new atmosphere, same wonderful affect of talking directly to the camera, talking directly to you. So I'll link to her. I don't think I've ever tagged her in anything. I don't know if she wants to be tagged by me or by anybody, but I'll link to her just because I want to recommend her channel to you. And that is the We Ain't Getting Younger, and of course Britta. Of course I tag Britta as well. But that is the We Ain't Getting Younger book tag. Sorry about the huge length. God, I went on and on. Who knows how much of that was because of Hitchens and Irving. God, that's a 2-hour video right there. I'm going to wrap this up before I try your patience any further. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.